installment of an American horror story, the reading of The Prisoner of War and how they were treated by A.C. Roach, Lieutenant A.C. Roach, who served in the Civil War and was indeed a prisoner of war. The book was published in 1865, right after the war was over, and last week we finished chapter 1. So in the third installment today, we're going to take a look at chapter 2, and we're going to start with the burning Black Creek Bridge. On the morning of May 2nd, we crossed Black Creek near Gadsden, Alabama, on a fine wooden bridge which was afterwards burned out by a rear guard. This, it was thought, would delay Forrest's forces long enough to enable us to reach Rome, Georgia, before he could again overtake us, and the stream was very deep and seemed unfordable. But among a lot of prisoners captured by us in the morning and paroled was a young man by the name of Sansom, who, soon as set at liberty, made his way direct to the pursuing of General Forrest and piloted that officer and his command to a ford where the whole force soon crossed and started again in pursuit of our brigade. From this incident, the rebels manufactured the following bit of romance. General Forrest had been pursuing the enemy all day and was close upon their heels when the pursuit was effectually checked by the destruction by the enemy of a bridge over a deep creek, which for the time separated pursuer and pursued. The country was exceedingly wild and rugged, and the banks of the creek too steep for passage on horseback. General Forrest rode up to a modest little farmhouse on the roadside, and seeing a young maiden standing upon the little front stoop in the front of the dwelling, he accosted her and inquired if there was any ford or passage for his men across the creek above or below the destroyed bridge. The young girl proceeded to direct him with animated gestures and cheeks flushed with excitement and almost breathless in her eagerness to aid the noble cause of the gallant Confederate general. It was a scene for a painter. The southern girl, her cheeks glowing and her bright eyes flashing, while her mother, unattracted by the colloquy, stood holding the door and gazing upon the cavalcade over her the venerable spectacles. The cavalry chieftain resting his legs carelessly over the saddled pommel, his staff drawn up around him, and his weather-worn veterans scattered in groups about the road, and some of them actually nodding in their saddles from excessive exhaustion. After some further inquiry, General Forrest asked the young lady if she would not mount behind him and show him the way to the ford. She hesitated and turned to her mother an inquiring look, and gave her an inquiring look, and the mother, with a delicacy becoming a prudent parent, rather seemed to object to her going alone with the soldiers. "Mother," she said, "I am not afraid to trust myself with as brave a man as General Forrest." "But, my dear, folks will talk about you," her mother replied. "Let them talk," responded the heroic girl. "I must go." And with that she lightly sprang upon the roots of the fallen tree. Forrest drew his mettled charger near her. She grasped the hero fearlessly about the waist and sprung up behind him, and away they went. Over brake and bramble, through the glade, and onward toward the ford. The route was a difficult one indeed, even for an experienced rider such as Forrest. But his fair young companion and guide had her seat like an experienced horsewoman, or held her seat like an experienced horsewoman, and without the slightest evidence of fear. At length they drew near to the ford. Upon a high ridge above, the quick eyes of Forrest descried the Yankee sharpshooters, dodging from tree to tree, and pretty soon an angry Minnie whistled by his ear. "What was that, General Forrest?" asked the maiden. "Bullets," he replied. "Are you afraid?" She replied in the negative, and they proceeded on, and at length it became necessary, from the density of the undergrowth and snags, to dismount, and Forrest hitched his horse, and the girl proceeded with him, leading the way herself, remarking that the Yankees would not fire upon her, and they might fire if he went first. To this Forrest objected, but not wishing to screen himself behind the brave girl. And taking the lead himself, the two proceeded onto the ford under the fire of the Yankee rear guard. Having discovered the route, he returned, brought up his axeman, and cleared out a road, and safely crossed his whole column. Upon taking leave of his fair young guide, the general asked if there was anything he might do for her in return for her invaluable services, and she told him that the Yankees on ahead of her had her brother prisoner, and if General Forrest would, could he only release him, she should be more than repaid. So the general took out his watch and examined it. It was just 5 minutes to 11. Tomorrow, he said, at 5 minutes to 11 o'clock, your brother shall be returned to you. And so the sequel proved. Straight with his whole command was captured at 10 the next morning. Young Sansom was released and dispatched on the fleetest horse in the command to return to his heroic sister, whose courage and presence of mind had contributed so much to the success of one of the most remarkable cavalry pursuits and captures known to world's history. The true version of this story is, as near as possible, as follows. Whenever we captured any prisoners, they were immediately paroled and not taken along with the command any distance, especially not 40 or 50 miles, as this rebel romance would indicate. And the young Confederate soldier Sansom was with General Forrest when our command surrendered, and notwithstanding his solemn oath not to aid or comfort in any manner whatever the enemies of the United States, was fully armed and equipped, and boasted that it was the bullet shot from his gun that killed the noble Hathaway. The battle, the Battle of Blunt's Farm. Soon after crossing Black Creek, we passed through the town of Gadsden, where we destroyed a quantity of rebel stores and captured some prisoners. When we then proceeded to Blunt's plantation, where we halted for the purpose of giving the men an opportunity of preparing a hasty meal for themselves and to feed their animals. But the anticipated pleasure of a cup of steaming coffee, which the Union soldiers considered one of his indispensables, was soon dispelled by the report of musketry and the direction of our picket line. The command was immediately given to prepare for action, and almost instantly every man in the provisional brigade seized his gun and was marching out bravely and defiantly to engage once more the vastly superior forces of the enemy, with whom we had contended successfully for 3 days and had completely routed and defeated in 2 regular pitched battles. Colonel Hathaway, with his regiment, was directed to the front and center to support our own howitzers, which were doing such fearful execution in the ranks of the enemy that they seemed to have resolved to capture them if possible, regardless of the cost in blood. Their efforts, however, were fruitless, for almost nearly every gunner and man connected with the 2 pieces was either killed or wounded. Colonel Hathaway so determinedly maintained his position that the enemy recoiled in the greatest confusion, our men pouring a perfect hail of lead into his retreating columns. This action lasted for nearly 3 hours, and the enemy charging our lines from right to left repeatedly, but was often repulsed with severe loss by our gallant regiment. When the sun set on the tranquil evening, sinking slowly down behind the forest, unstirred by the last breath of wind, the sharp and bloody struggle was decided. The enemy was retreating badly hurt, his dead men and horses strewn in their line of retreat. Our horses won the day by hard and desperate fighting, but lost in the struggle one of the most valiant hearts that ever beat. He was, in the performance of his duty, riding along his skirmish line, waving his hat and cheering his men on, when he received a pulmonary wound from a minie ball, cutting a large blood vessel, from which he died almost instantly. And the noble, the chivalric, the gallant Hathaway was no more. He fell the noblest of sacrifices on the altar of his country, to whose glorious service he had dedicated his life. Thus passed away a noble, lofty soul. Thus ended a career full of arduous, glorious, and splendid achievements. He was never with that part of his regiment, which was under the, bad mistake there. He was ever with that part of his regiment, which was under the hottest fire, and when the enemy shifted their fire to other portions, he proceeded thither and directed the movements of each company in person. His men will remember how cheering and inspiring his presence with them was, and how his coolness steadied them in the most exciting moment, and his brave, cheerful voice was the herald of success. His character was so frank and open and beautiful, his bearing so modest and full of simplicity, that he conciliated all hearts and made everyone who met him his friend. Thus, modest, brave, loving, and beloved, the famous soldier, the charming companion, he was called away from the scene of the triumphs and glory to a brighter world, where neither war nor rumors of war ever come, and wounds and pain and suffering are unknown there. Prospect of success. Affairs were now rapidly approaching a crisis stage. Everyone felt that the next 24 hours would decide the fate of our expedition. We were now within 60 miles of Rome, the point at which we designed crossing the Cusa River, and if we could reach that place before a force could be thrown to check our further advance, complete success would be inevitable. For once, on the opposite side of the river, and the bridge destroyed after us, the pursuit of force would be effectually checked, and we would then have ample time to recruit and exhausted energies of our men and of our animals. Besides, if necessary, we could soon obtain an entire fresh supply of the latter, and could then either fight or decline battle at our own option. On the contrary, should there be a force collected at Rome sufficient to prevent us crossing the bridge, there would be no alternative left to us but to surrender. The exhausted condition of our men and animals rendering escape by any route, strategy, or valor in battle an impossibility. To guard against the above contingency, Captain Russell of the 51st Indiana was ordered with 200 picked men mounted on our best horses to proceed with the greatest dispatch to Rome and take possession of the river bridge, railroad stock, and telegraph lines before the forces there could make preparation for defense, or troops be brought from Atlanta and other points on the railroad in case they were advised by the couriers from General Forrest or otherwise of the advance of our expedition. After some active demonstrations and strategic movements designed to impress the enemy with the belief that we were preparing for a renewal of the contest at the earliest dawn of day, the balance of the command moved on as fast as the fatigue condition of our animals would permit. Lose our road. Strong hopes were now entertained as success, and would no doubt have been realized had our guide not misled us in regard to the ford by which we were to cross the Chattahoochee River. In justice to him, however, it is but proper to remark that he was a true and faithful man, and this the only instance in which he seemed at fault. But this irreparable mistake took us at least 12 miles out of our direct course, besides otherwise delaying us. We marched all night, making 4 consecutive days and nights in the saddle, except when fighting or feeding our animals. It was during this, our last night's march, that one of our scouting parties destroyed the Round Mountain Iron Works, situated in Cherokee Valley, about 30 miles from Rome. These works were at the time largely engaged manufacturing ordnance and material for the rebel army, and employed nearly 1,000 hands. And we're going to end there for this session. Next week we will pick up at Captain Russell's party, continuing chapter 2. I hope that you are, I can't really say enjoying, but that you are historically interested in hearing this man's account of what he and the men that he was around went through in the Civil War. So far we've heard horrors, but we haven't really got to the full brunt of it yet. in his book. So I hope that you'll join me next week for part 4. God bless you, love you all, and see you again next week, God willing.